Welcome back to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, and on today's episode, I interview my good friend, Sarah Jane Cobb. Sarah Jane is a Chick-fil-A owner-operator in Glasgow, Kentucky, and we talk about her journey from having a successful career in journalism to leaving that to pursue becoming a restaurant owner-operator for Chick-fil-A, which she has done very successfully. We talk about how the communication skills and grit that she learned as a journalist have translated into her career now as a business owner with Chick-fil-A for her restaurant, and why clarity and communication are some of her cornerstones that guide how she leads her business today. She also gives her best advice for young people in their careers that are pursuing their dreams. Be intense. We're going to dive into that in this conversation. I wrote a book called Master Your First Job. This book is the remarkable path from first day to first promotion. It is for any young person who's working at their first job or about to be working in their first job or pursuing their first professional opportunity out of school. This is the book that every young employee needs and every employer wishes that they had. You can get a free copy of this book at masteryourfirstjob.com/free, which is linked below. Let's dive into my conversation with my good friend, Sarah Jane Cobb. Sarah Jane Cobb, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'd love for you to share a little bit about you and your story.
Jacob, thank you for having me. A little bit about me. I am the youngest of 5 kids. I grew up in a conservative pastor's home in East Tennessee, and I always say I was surrounded by really, really hardworking women, but never really saw a lot of women in leadership roles and never really saw that as an option for me. And so a lot of my successes come from a lot of failure. So you're going to hear a lot about failure today.
That's okay.
But I started working at Chick-fil-A when I was 15 years old, and I just loved it. I thought it was so much fun. But I always say, do not call my old operator and ask him about my leadership capacity, because I was just there for a good time.
Yeah. Get there for a paycheck and some cash.
It was my social circle for sure. I did want to, pay for my gas, pay for my insurance, and pay for my cell phone. So those were the objectives.
We have the same story.
I usually had about maybe $20.
That's right.
But I enjoyed it so much there, and just went across the street to start serving over at Cheddar's Casual Cafe. We called it Chick-fil-A College, because once you turned 18 and you could start serving tables, that's where typically people went.
That's funny.
Yeah, we had fun. It was all the same people too, so it was fun. And then I went to the University of Tennessee, studied broadcast journalism. I met my husband there in my last semester. My mother was thrilled that I was getting my MRS degree, and
that's funny.
We just hit it off really, really quickly.
Yeah.
So David was in writing journalism. I was in broadcast journalism. So sports writing, he was sports writing, I was news broadcast. And we went separate ways. We were still dating long distance, but I went to my first job in Hazard, Kentucky, and I was a small fish in a small pond. I was a producer and a reporter. And I was working 4 days a week, 12-hour shifts on the weekends. And then I would spend 3-day weekends, usually visiting my family at home. David was in Chattanooga, and he would travel up to Knoxville, and we would spend time together there. And he was doing the outdoors reporter for Chattanooga, which was so funny. You can talk to David about that one. And, and then he got an opportunity to cover the Tennessee Volunteers. It was really funny because I kept on asking David, hey, if there's something that's going to change, we need to make that change. We need to make that change. And that opportunity became available in Knoxville. And I just went home one weekend, and I think my general manager at WYMT in Hazard found out that David had gotten the opportunity in Knoxville. And he calls the sister station in Knoxville, and says, hey, this girl's going to be moving to Knoxville, and she's either going to go work for you or she's going to go work for WBIR, which was the #1 station. And they were like, he was like, you want her on your team. And so I went in for a station tour and came out with a job offer.
Wow.
And in the same 2 weeks, I think David and I got engaged. So it was wild. We had so much fun. It was probably one of the most fun chapters of my life. And I was also nominated for an AP award in that time period. So that it was just,
I didn't know that.
Everything came together for SJ in a short time. David was on the Paul Feinbaum show. We were on top of the world. And we were doing journalism in Knoxville, kind of like the We were different entities, but we kind of had that power team dynamic for about a year and a half. And David's dad was diagnosed with ALS. And I kept on asking David, would you ever want to move back to Memphis? Would you ever want to move, closer to your family? How can we help them? And David was, he said, that's such a temporary disease. We are finding ways to support ALS here. We're going home as often as we can, but we can't make a permanent decision based on a temporary life change. And I was like, okay. And he said, now, if I were covering the Grizzlies or something, we would reconsider. Well, sure enough, I always say that David has to be careful about what he says out loud because God listens. And sure enough, the position to cover the Grizzlies at the paper he grew up reading became available. And so he applied for that, moving us to Memphis. I kind of took that as my exit from news. We can go a little bit more into that later.
Yeah.
But I kind of just decided, what do I want to do now? I knew that if there was a time to change, it was going to be, this was the time. I was 26 or 27. And I just knew that I'd had a successful career and I wanted to exit with grace and dignity and not get kicked out for old age. And so I just really thought about what I wanted to do and some self-reflection, but at a time where everything was so different and it was such a vulnerable time, I felt led back to Chick-fil-A of all things. And I think there was something also very entrepreneurial brewing. And so anyways, went back to work for Chick-fil-A, spent about a year and a half working for an operator in Millington, Tennessee, and then later went into the leadership development program where I met my good friend Jacob Carnes at the very beginning.
That's right.
And spent about 2.5 years in the leadership development program, traveling all over the country, helping restaurants going through a transition of ownership, as well as grand opening restaurants. And then my husband and I planted ourselves in a town called Springfield, Tennessee, where we spent about a year and a half building results and applying for restaurants until we most recently got selected for a restaurant in Glasgow, Kentucky. And so now this is our forever home, and we are just so grateful.
Firmly planted in Glasgow, Kentucky. Celebrities in Glasgow, Kentucky.
That's
Some might say.
Some might say. I should also mention we have our daughter, Rosie, who we had in Springfield. And although she moved to Glasgow at 6 months old, I don't know if she'll be able to say that she is originally from Glasgow because there is a strict requirement to be from Glasgow, and it is to be born in Glasgow.
On the ground in Glasgow. That's great.
Yes.
Oh, that's so good. We met in April of 21. Is that right? Or was it 22?
It was April 21.
Okay, April 21. I hit it off with you regardless. I was just like, oh, you're bubbly and fun to be around and you seem driven. And I'm like, we hit it off. And we were at a dinner when we met and like in person. And I admit my fun fact, at all these icebreaker events, you meet a ton of people. This is just every job, not just Chick-fil-A, but you meet a ton of people and it's like, what's a fun fact? So my go-to is always that I had a college football podcast because I'm like, how many people working in corporate just have like a sports podcast on the side? Like that's an easy fun fact to lean on. So that's always my lean on fun fact. And you're like, this is my husband, David. He works in college football. And I'm like, I just think of whatever in my head. I was like, cool. Like who do you work for? And you're like, he's like, CBS Sports. I'm like, what? So I'm like David Cobb. I'm like, that name sounds so familiar. And we're walking into the table at dinner and I'm pulling up my CBS Sports app because I'm like, is he one of these 6 guys that does the expert picks every week? I'm like, I'm pretty sure he is, like a national writer. And I'm pulling up, it was like an article to come out like 3 days before, like the expert picks. It has all their pictures on it and like all the games they're picking. And I'm like, I'm like, this is David Cobb. So like it was for me a celebrity moment of like, dude, you get to cover college football for a living at the national level. And we're just eating at some Mexican restaurant in Tucson. So
if someone knows who David Cobb is, you really are a sports nerd. Like you are up there.
Oh man.
I know he's a big deal.
Yes.
It was really funny because whenever we were dating, I think people were like, why are you dating her? Because I was like some ditzy blonde who came in the middle of college and decided, I think I'll go to journalism school today. And he had known that he wanted to do it forever. And he was extremely talented, as talented. And again, like my successes have come from my failures and I had to work very, very hard to get to have a successful career in journalism.
Well, you and David are a joy, and a joy to know and a joy to be around. And I love both of you. I think you mentioned this, but Chick-fil-A was the first job. Is that right?
It was. I started at 15 years old.
Full cert. I mean, were you like you're working, like 5 to 7 at 15? You closing at 15?
So it was 4 to 7.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
Saturday mornings were 7 to 3. And
8-hour shift.
And it was like, loved Saturdays at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah,
Especially
me too.
in the fall, we were all going to a football game wasn't an option for me. I couldn't drive, like what fun is that? So like, I just loved it. And, we were in Tennessee, it was Vol Nation. So like, it was just orange everywhere. We had hay bales, we had, all kinds of stuff. And then the first thing that I would do is just come in and make 10 gallons of sweet tea, 4 gallons of unsweet tea. And we would just have them ready because it was such a big catering day.
That's right.
And actually, it was really funny because whenever we opened the restaurant here in Glasgow, I come in every Saturday morning and I'm like, man, I love Saturdays at Chick-fil-A. And one kid was like, yeah, money. And I was like, no. I'm like, they're just fun. And
it's just fun.
So, yeah, and I think that they get to see that, especially whenever I'm just like on minis with them. And, they're like, we're holding on 10 counts. I'm like, let's go. It's just fun.
I have very fond memories, both as a kid working in the restaurant on Saturdays. I mean, I could share several stories, but also when I was a leader in the restaurant, my operator would come in on Saturdays with I'm not going to get him in trouble, but like jeans, untucked polo, backwards hat, and just like immediately go to the kitchen and just like, he'd come in at like 8 and then like work through transition in the kitchen. Just a lot of fun of just like, he's like, I'm coming in to just like box minis and make biscuits and have a good time. And lots of fond memories there. I'm like, yeah, lots of fond memories. So you had a big change because, I mean, full circle is very cool that your first job was Chick-fil-A and now you have your own Chick-fil-A. But got your degree in journalism. We're working for news stations. Obviously, life change leads to you thinking about long-term plans. Like, what went into that decision to leave a career that it seems like you had very successfully and was able to get multiple jobs, had a degree in, had the stamp of I am a journalist, I get to be on the news, and go into, well, what if in a sense, what if I go back and work in fast food? At the end of the day, that's what Chick-fil-A is, right? I know you and I think a lot higher Chick-fil-A than that, but that seems like from the outside looking in, people could question that change. What went into that change
people
and why make that decision?
Questioned it.
I'm sure.
My mother-in-law was one. She was just like, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're really good at journalism. So why are you doing this?
Right.
And, but I will say once my mother-in-law did the research on, what a path would look like, she became the most supportive mother-in-law, especially through LDP and things like that. So, but there were definitely questions and it really, really goes way, way back, Jacob. Whenever I was 2 years old, my dad was an accountant. He'd been an accountant for, I think, 30 years. And they had 5 kids. One kid was out of the house, but they had 4 kids. And my dad decided that he was going to become a pastor. And so we packed up and went to Florida. We lived in a condo, a 3-bed, 2-bath condo in Orlando. And my dad went to seminary for 2.5 years and became a pastor. And thankfully we had a good income, and we also had, the church provided a house for us to live in, but my dad really acted out on faith, and
yeah.
And so it was just like, it was one of those things where at that point in my life, I was like, I don't want to be doing this for 40 years and then decide that I want to do something else.
Right.
And so it's like, it's really funny because I think I got that trait from my dad. I think he's got it's not necessarily entrepreneurial, but it is leadership oriented.
Yeah.
And I think my dad was really proud of me for identifying that. And being the youngest of 5 kids, I've always been able to identify what I wanted and what I didn't want. And so that was just something that I think that's a gift of being the youngest. Like, you can underestimate the youngest if you want, but we're able to see what other people do. And we're like, okay, that's good. And that's not, and here's what I want. And so I think that understanding the repercussions and the hard decision-making that it took to have a career of 40 years and then make that decision, it was much more impactful on my family. And so I wanted to make that decision earlier on. If there was something that I wanted to change, then this was the time to do it. And I loved journalism. Journalism was one of the pillars of mine and David's relationship. We said Jesus and journalism.
Yeah.
And And so whenever I left, I was like, I didn't ask him if he still loved me, because I mean, we were married, so it doesn't matter if you still love me.
You're stuck. You're stuck.
But we but it was one of those things where I was just like, man, what would we do? But my vision of success truly changed, and I basically maxed out in journalism very, very quick. My goal was to become an anchor in my hometown in 20 years, and I did it within 3.5. So
Wow.
the question was, what's next? Okay, I could go to a different market where I don't understand the people as much as what I did in Knoxville, or I could be the 6 and 11 o'clock anchor and anchor the news, the nighttime news forever. Like that's the pinnacle.
Got it.
However, if I did not want to move, I'm okay with moving for Chick-fil-A, but for news where like the values were just so instilled in me and I was so trusted for content that was pertinent to our viewers, I just knew I was never going to be as successful in any other market than I would be in Knoxville. And so the option was to become the 6 and 11 o'clock anchor. I was like, okay, so these kids that we want to have in the future, one day I'd be picking them up from school, dropping them off at our house, going back to work at night and missing all my time with my family. And that to me just wasn't success. Even though it was winning, it was, achieving something, it wasn't success. And in hindsight, I think that was something very entrepreneurial. I just never wanted to be attached to someone else's timetable. And in news, everything is time oriented.
Right.
Everything is contractual. And so you're not in control of who your boss is. You're not in control of which show you're going to be on. You're not in control of anything. You really just, you sign the contract and you say, hey, I can do this. I'll take less and do more so you don't have to pay somebody else to do it. And I made a commitment to myself at that point that I was never going to market myself like that ever again. And again, it just wasn't entrepreneurial, right? And so it was an achievement. It was a mindset, but it wasn't a success mindset. And so that's really what went into the decision making of leaving journalism. And then I would say that God just really directed my path in returning to Chick-fil-A, because at that time I wasn't like, I'm going to be a Chick-fil-A operator. It was more like, no, I need something familiar in a time where everything was just so vulnerable and unfamiliar. And I ended up talking to a couple of friends that I worked at Chick-fil-A with whenever I was 14 and 15 years old, who had, gone into the leadership development program.
Cool.
And they told me, you could totally do it. Go and work for an operator and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I did. But I was very, very intentional with it.
Right.
I would say to a point where that was weird. I think, and I think a lot of people want to go into the leadership development program, but they're not willing to put in the work that it takes to get in there. And I can honestly say I went in with focus every single day. And I don't know what drove that, except it was a strong desire to be successful.
I mean, I learned this in 6th grade, but Stephen Covey principle, begin with the end in mind. And it's like you went to that job at the restaurant, not just LDP, with the mindset of like, I'm doing this to become a Chick-fil-A operator. So that's going to guide like how I approach this decision making I make every day, like why I'm taking this job. Like that is the end goal. And you've done it now. You are a Chick-fil-A operator.
Well, and I also want to give credit to the leaders that I worked with in the restaurant. They challenged me, every decision that I made, they would challenge me with like, what would you do if you were the operator? And so that was really, really cool. I remember there was one time where, I don't know, it was like a really, really small strip. And we had 3, but there was only 1 left. And I was like, should I just put this in there just to like give to them? And, he challenged me, what would you do if you were the operator? And I was like, well, it'd be going to waste. So like, might as well just put it in there. Right. And he's like, and he challenged me from an operator's perspective of what does that do for the brand moving forward? Are they going to expect 4 strips out of the 3 strip moving forward? So it was one of those things that like there were constantly exercises like that. And I was very grateful for leadership giving me those.
I mean, in my book, my acknowledgments was just like, here's everyone who helped me figure this out over 10 years of just like, I have a lot of people to thank, and it took up an entire page of just like, there's too many of you. So I'm just going to put all your names down and say, thank you. Because would not be here without the people who helped lead me. And I know you're the same. Is there anything from journalism that you feel like translated into being a Chick-fil-A operator? And on the opposite end, is there anything that's just like either that you miss from the journalism stuff that you don't have as an operator? But start with what translates. What skills did you feel like you learned either at school or doing the news and being in journalism that have helped you be a good Chick-fil-A operator now?
I do think communication is the obvious answer there.
Yeah.
I think that something based on what I saw from trainers whenever they were frustrated with their home restaurant, I think that they didn't have a lot of time to communicate with their operators. They didn't feel like they had a direct relationship with them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Or that they were left out of information. And I think that giving your leadership information also gives them ownership. And so making sure that they have the information that they need to be successful and that clear communication is there for them is very, very important. But I think the underlying theme that I took from journalism to being an operator is grit. I think a lot of people think that just being a news anchor is, get your hair done and someone's there to do your makeup. There's not. That's a myth. It's always a lie. But no, I was climbing up the mountains of Eastern Kentucky in heels with a camera on my back. And shooting my own live shots. It was a really, really gritty job. And to be honest, I wasn't very good at it, but I wanted to be good at it. And so there was one point where I just took home a camera on my 3-day weekends and I would practice shooting and I would go and watch other people's reels. Matt Pearl in Atlanta was one. I loved Matt Pearl and I actually met him in Atlanta. I fangirled so hard whenever I was on assignment with Chick-fil-A and I was like, Matt Pearl! And he was like, this is amazing. I've never had anyone fangirl over me.
That's so funny. That was like me with your husband.
So I was just like, I tried to surround myself with people who were very, very good at the job. And it wasn't people who were at the station because it was a really, really competitive station. But it was, this is a media, right? So they were sharing their stuff and a lot of people would share their ideas. And so I would just try new things and I went to workshops and I just really, really tried hard and a lot of grit. And I finally, in that second year, there was a tremendous improvement from my first year. And I think the first year was this victim mindset of like, I was good in college. I was good. And then I go to this antiquated station where we were doing tape to tape. We weren't even doing anything digital. It was like tape to tape that you did in the 70s and 80s. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm not going to be good at that because I'm having to step back in time.
Yeah.
And so I was just in this victim mindset. And if I'd just really gone in with grit, I would have had a completely different first year. But I think it was also unmet expectations, and I felt victimized by those unmet expectations. And my second year was the game changer because I stepped out of the victim mindset and went into the grit mindset.
Yeah, the victim mindset. I tell people like victim mindset, the difference in the victim and the hero in the story is that both deal with bad circumstances, both deal with bad stuff, and bad stuff happens to them. The victim looks at, they both get in the hole and the victim looks around and says, this sucks. And woe is me. And the hero is trying to figure out how to climb out. And they eventually do climb out because they have the grit to figure it out. I think that victim mindset is really important. And something else you said was just like you were always learning, right? Like always learning, always being better and owning your own development, which I think is so important because I think a lot of us get out of school, you get in one of these first jobs where you're a young professional and you're thinking like, oh, I can't wait and luckily you and I both did have amazing leaders that have poured into us, but you're looking for that to be the reason you develop. And then when that doesn't happen, development stalls and you don't get any better. And I think learning that for you early on had to have paid dividends just because of, again, insider info here. You're in a development program that absolutely is a development program, but I mean, it's not a secret that with Chick-fil-A's leadership development program, if you're not owning your own development, you will not be developed. And yes, there's great leaders that you get to work with, but I mean, you're on your own in a city somewhere, and if you're not figuring out how to be better, I think that grit probably paid a ton of dividends for you, especially in those situations where no one's holding your hand. You're kind of having to figure it out, which is prepping you for the role you have now as a business owner, where you are the person in charge. The buck stops with you. And if something's going wrong with the business, you can't have a victim mindset because it's your business at the end of the day. And you got to be the one to figure it out. Something else you talked about with journalism that I wanted to get into was communication. I My hot take in the leadership space is that I think that clarity is the single most important leadership quality above anything else. And we can argue about that if you want, but my thought is clarity. And something you've said is that your team never has to guess what you're thinking. And I think that is so underrated. Why is that important to you, and how does that benefit your team?
Yeah, I think, well, especially being a woman, I think that there's just people are very, very quick to see whenever there's a change in mood and they're like, oh, she's moody or something like that. Like, I try to really, really bring consistent leadership, a consistent attitude, positive and professional at all times.
Yeah.
But if I'm not happy, we're usually in the red, and they know it's because we're in the red, and it's usually driven by the guest experience, and it's also driven by the team member experience. I want this to be a good experience for our team.
Right.
And if something feels like it's a $5,000 hour, but we did 2,500, I'm like, what are we doing?
Those are the best days.
We need to figure out what went wrong, to make that feel better. Because I want a $5,000 hour that feels like it was 25. That's the best day.
Yes. Sorry, that's what I thought you had said. Yes, that's the best day.
Yes. And so whenever something feels harder than it actually is, I'm not happy. And they know that. But these are the questions that I ask. What went well? What did not go well? What needs to change? What's important now? And those 4 questions were brought to me from a consultant in the leadership development program, Mr. Eddie Taylor. Love Eddie Taylor. And so those were the questions that I brought to him, or those were the answers that I brought to him every time. I think it was like every week or something. I would send in a report, but I asked my shift leaders to do it every day. And so it's more for them.
Yeah.
And it is for me too, because I'm not there at all times. And so it keeps me informed on the business, but it is also more for them because it holds them accountable to what went wrong, and I'm like, this isn't a time to rat yourself out or to blame yourself for anything. It's like, no, we need to problem shoot. And what needs to change is the answer to what went wrong.
That's good. I mean, again, I think reflecting even on normal, nothing really happened, or the best days, asking those questions is still important, because I think some of the worst stuff that can happen is accidental success. I think that's worse than even failure, because if you succeed and have no idea what went into it, then you can't replicate it. And then it's not helpful. It's actually like it hinders future success if you can't figure out what went well. So I think asking those reflection questions, even obviously on bad days, people are like, yeah, we should be asking what we need to change, but even asking those questions on good days, because sometimes you can have, that was a good day, but honestly, it was despite what we did wrong today. We ended up, that was the accident, was the good day.
Right. What went well, and how can we systemize it so we do it again?
That's right. Because we want to do it over and over again. And not just the guest experience. Like you said, even team member, you want your team members to love coming to work, which is the experience you had that made you want to come back to Chick-fil-A later, is those fun Chick-fil-A Saturdays, which sometimes I miss, sometimes I don't, I'll be honest.
And I'll say this about consistency. Consistency builds trust, and trust builds grit. And so your team is going to work way harder for you whenever they trust you.
That is so true. I'm like, I have several leaders that I'm like, you could ask me to go clean a dumpster with a toothbrush, and I'll just trust that that's what we need to do, and that's what's best right now, because I trust you, trust your heart. I think that you want what's best for me. I think that's really important too from a boss is, do you have my best interests in mind? The best people I worked for knew that I was not going to work for them forever, and actively helped me get to what was next too, which again, that builds a lot of trust equity. That builds a lot of equity, and they can ask me to do anything, and I'm more than willing to do it for those people. I think that's really important. Okay, I asked you some strength about yourself before we recorded. You mentioned something that I'm like, yeah, like that is so you. And it was your network of, you feel like you can call anybody, like pick up the phone, and like it's just something you're really proud of. And from the moment I met you, I'm just like bubbly personality, could definitely tell you were news or doing something just like in front of people. And that is just not me. And beyond that though, I hate asking for help. I hate it. And I don't know what it is about me. I'm being vulnerable with this, but I feel like a bird when I ask for help. And I feel like I know a ton of people, but I also feel this sense of like, maybe I haven't talked to Sarah Jane in a long time, but now I'm in Glasgow, Kentucky, and my car breaks down. It's a true story. Maybe it's another podcast.
It's oddly specific.
Now I need to ask for help. But honestly, even like, I have a buddy who's an electrician. I had an outlet that was messing up. I'm like, oh man, I haven't talked to him in a few weeks. I feel bad texting him and asking about this outlet. That's just, maybe it's a me problem. Maybe I'm the only one who's going to get something out of this, but do you have any problem with that? Or are you just like, I have a good network, I manage it all well, I'm a good person, like you're proud of your network. How do you build a good one? And any advice for me who feels like a burden anytime I ask for help in this world, I feel like a burden.
Authenticity is one of my personal values. It's not one of
Yeah,
the values at our restaurant, but it's one of my personal values. And so building that network came from authentic relationships that were
that's
built.
good.
Now, sometimes out of nativity, sometimes like I think you saw like I had a meeting with Jennifer McKinnon one day and you were like, ooh, meeting with Jennifer McKinnon, that's a big deal. And I was like, I didn't know she was a big deal. I literally just like introduced myself to her because she was the external LDP recruiter. And I was just,
Yeah,
I'm an external. And so I just thought I'd introduce myself, you know? So yes, like, and Jennifer McKinnon is still, I would call her a treasured Chick-fil-A friend.
she is the best.
She's so good. Yeah. And I would say, you know, there's a difference between asking for advice and asking for help.
Okay.
I would say I'm more of an asking for advice type of girl.
That's totally fair.
And I would say like someone like an electrician, I actually probably would call an electrician and pay for their services. I'm not going to try it myself because I know better than that.
Me neither.
But I try to honor people's traits and make sure that they're compensated for that. But advice, I think, comes going back to authenticity is also coming with vulnerability and understanding that, you know, this isn't my strength and sharing the losses, you know. And I think I even shared with you, you know, we were on such a strong trajectory for labor percentages whenever we first opened. And then the second month hit and it was like, you know.
Oof.
Yeah. And I've had to tap into my friends to talk about, you know, the ones especially who've gone through this before me. And so I'll ask them for their labor and productivity worksheets and working on, you know, and I think that that's also the result of having authentic relationships, but also building up my friends too. You know, I take some credit because I am a good hype girl. So over the years, my friends and I have hyped each other up, and their wins are our wins and our wins are their wins.
That's good.
And so whenever I am tapping into a friend and asking for her productivity worksheet, you know, I'm always going to give her credit for it. And yeah, that is the work that she's done. And that's the work that she's essentially paid for. But she's paying it forward by helping me as well. And so I think that there's a difference between asking for advice and asking for help.
That's totally fair.
I don't think I'm good at asking for help unless I'm actually paying them. Like if you ask my executive director if I'm good at asking for help, he'd be like, yes, you are.
She texts me all the time. No, that's fair.
Actually, he's like helped me come over and change a light bulb because our ceilings are like vaulted. And I'm like,
that's funny.
So yeah, I'm very good at asking people who I pay for help.
Yes. No, totally fair. Maybe the electrician was that was more of an advice question for what it's worth. I'm going to pay him for his services 100%.
And I will say, like, from an authentic point of view, I can tell whenever someone is reaching out to me only for something else. And I just never want to make people feel that way.
Oh, I'm the same way. That's why, honestly, I hate doing sales. To me, this has been 2.5 years. To me, sales feels like asking for help and not I'm providing you something that will help you. And let's exchange. Yeah.
People who do sales, they really have to believe in their product. You know?
Yes.
And I think that the successful ones really do.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. Okay, going back to the network. One thing I wanted to point out, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that I've talked to a lot of people about networking and like building a good network, and you know, there's LinkedIn gurus everywhere. And I mean, when I was at the support center, it's, you know, are you meeting with someone else once a month and all this other stuff? And I'm like, man, I feel like it's take. But honestly, I feel like the people who build a strong network, which you said this is, can you be a giver first and be your authentic self and really not want anything out of it? You know, like I started approaching these conversations of, I just want to meet you and like hear who you are and learn about what you do. And sure, I'm getting time from you, but I'm going to be authentic and be grateful and write a thank you note. And like, it really did mean a lot. I'm not sitting here being like, can you help me get a job in the next 6 months? Cause like you said, you can read that pretty easy. You can smell BS from a mile away, which I feel like building a good network, being a giver and being authentic is so important on the front end to building a strong network.
Hit the nail on the head with gratitude. Gratitude is like, I always try to start and end with gratitude.
Yeah.
In whatever interactions.
I love that. We have talked about a lot today. Let me try to land the plane with this. You accomplished, maybe you didn't know it was a dream at the time of 15, but you felt like you had a dream job. You went from working Chick-fil-A at your first job. You now own your own Chick-fil-A. You're like, this is my forever role. We're staying in Glasgow forever. You've done it. You're young. You've done it. You've made the mountaintop. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're not going to continue growing, continue to accomplish results, but you've kind of made it. If there were other young people listening to this episode and they're like, man, how can I do what Sarah did? You made several big changes. Just you've accomplished a ton. What's like the one piece of advice you could give of like, hey, just start doing this today to work towards that? Because it's not going to change overnight, but if you could give one piece of advice of like, hey, start doing this, what would it be?
Be intense.
Be intense. Okay.
Yes, nobody ever got anywhere great from being mediocre and just playing it chill all the time. And people are going to look at you like you're weird. People are going to have questions. People are going to be like, man, you're exhausting, or that's not what you're paid to do, or things like that. Do the things that you need to do to be successful.
Yeah.
In the interim, and honestly, I would even say, I'm not asking anyone to do any work for me without being paid, but I definitely did a lot of work without being paid.
Same.
And guess what? If it was 3 hours a week unpaid to do the schedule, and it got me to being an operator today, I would do it.
So be it.
Now,
we're not going to name names for any legal trouble. I don't know if we're past the statute of limitations, but no, I'm not. That's good.
That's where it got me. And honestly, the person that I was working for at that time had every reason not to pay me. He said, I already pay someone else to do the schedule. I needed the experience to do the schedule.
Yeah.
So guess what? I'm going to do the schedule for free. I would never take that back, And so just do what you got to do. Be intense, be relentless, I don't want to say be a nag because I hate a good nag, but make people wonder if you're crazy. And it's always better to hold back a Mustang than it is to kick a mule. And I think that anybody who has interacted with me over the past however many years would classify me as a Mustang. And so I just think that there's a lot of benefits with intensity. And I think you look at the great people and you know that they didn't just end up there by accident.
I think that is a common thread among really successful people, is just this drive of no's not an option or an answer. We're going to do it regardless. I remember going to my operator, my first restaurant, after figuring out like there was potentially Chick-fil-A career opportunities beyond the four walls of my restaurant, and hearing some of the stuff people were doing and just being like, I don't need a promotion. I don't need you to pay me extra. I just want this extra responsibility so that I can put my name on it. And I'm like, it's going to be mutually beneficial. Your restaurant's going to be better, and I get to tie my name to results. This is a win-win. You don't have to do anything else. I just want the responsibility. Like, I don't need a title. I don't need, now I'd be like, all right, if I'm cutting, if I'm increasing your profit by 2%, maybe I could get a little bit more money. No, but same thing. Yeah. I did it essentially for free because I knew it's what was necessary. I think there's no getting around doing the hard, necessary work to be successful. There is no shortcut to that. So I like the way you put it of be intense. I love that. And I'm a sports fan, so I love intensity.
And I also compare everything to sports. Like, as the operator, I'm like, okay, I want the same intensity that you're bringing to football practice that you are to the breading table, right?
Yeah.
So I am
pulverize that chicken.
And I also just want to say, you mentioned I'd made it, every achievement, all these things. And as an achievement mindset person, I'm a 3.
Yeah.
I'm an achiever to a T. But one thing that I love about being an operator, and this is to all the achievers, is that the work is never done. I think that, yes, I've made the achievement of being the operator, but there's always room for improvement to become a better operator and to run a better business. And that's something that I love about the restaurant, is that the work is never done and there's always a new achievement to climb. And while the title doesn't change, the results are awesome and so measurable. And then not only that in the business, but developing other leaders too. Your achievements become their achievements. And it's a really, really satisfying role. So to anybody who has made it, I would challenge you haven't made it.
That's right. There's always another result to be accomplished, always another win, or another win for someone else, which, like you said, is in turn, I count those as wins. When I can help someone else win, that's a win for me. And that's motivating to me personally. Sarah Jane, this has been a joy to interview you on the podcast. Where can people connect with you, or if they want to place a multi-$1,000 catering order in Glasgow, Kentucky, where can they do that?
Yeah, multi-$1,000 catering order. You can reach us at 270-331. But no, in all reality, you can reach me at sarahjane.cobb@cfafranchisee.com. And Sarah is spelled with an H. Jane is one word, sarahjane.cobb@cfafranchisee.com. Would love to connect with anybody who is thinking about coming back to Chick-fil-A after a full-time career or anything like that. You know you'll get a biased perspective, but it'll also be very informed. But Jacob, thank you so much for having me on today. It's been a pleasure, and I'm just so grateful for your friendship. I really do consider you part of my network. If I have, I just feel like you have such a great way of understanding the business and the protocol that Chick-fil-A has, which is not always easy to balance, but you are very, very good at it and very knowledgeable. And I'm just so grateful that that people at Chick-fil-A have you in their corner.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to know you as well. You guys are great friends, and appreciate you being on. And thank you all for watching and listening to this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Take care.